In that video, we'll discuss how to deal with text files in Python. We'll learn how to read data from a text file, how to write data to a text file, and finally we'll exercise the new concepts with a parsing example. There are two types of files, text and binary. A text file contains data that has been encoded as text, therefore human readable, while a binary file contains data that has not been converted to text, therefore not human readable. We will be discussing the text files. However, everything you learn here also applies to a binary file. To open a file, we use a Python function called open. And to use that, you just type open, and then you need to provide two arguments, the file name and the mode. If I check what I have in that directory, I have the file script and a text file called South America. If I check, here I have some of the countries from South America. Now, if I want to open that file, I just need to enter the name of the file here. So that's going to be a string. And we have that argument called mode. And the main modes we use are read, write, and append. The read mode is as it sounds. You can just open the file and read it. You are not allowed to write on it. If you now want to write, you're going to be using W as your writing mode. For that, you are allowed to write, and if that file already exists, just be careful because you will overwrite its content. If that file does not exist, you create a file with that name and then add the data. Finally, append, you add the data to the end of the file. If the file does not exist, you create it. To read the content of that file, we use the read mode, which is R. Then we need to assign that file object to a variable. I'm going to call it file. Now, the easier way to read the content of any file is using the read method. How is that? You just type file.read. Then I'll assign that read method that's going to return a string to a variable called content. To print that content that we already know, we just type print and then the content of that file. If I clean my screen and run that code, you see that I get the content of that file, which is Argentina, Bolivia, all the way up to Venezuela. Finally, we close that file. We do that by the close method. You just type file and close. I want to show you a more efficient way to open a file, and that's by using the with statement. You just type with. We open the file using the open function, same as we did before, as file. I add the colon, hit enter. Now, after I hit enter, you see that we are indented. It means that we are inside the with block. And then we do the same. I create a variable called content, and then we assign file.read to that. And again, file.read is going to be all the content of that file. Which file? southamerica.txt. Then let's just print it. Print content. Then I comment the code above, clean my screen, and run it. Note that we got the same result, and the only difference is here I don't need to call the close method. Why? When using the with statement, the file will be closed in the end of its block execution. You can choose in which way you want to open your file. I'll be using the second one, using the with statement. Okay, the read method is not the only way we can read the entire data from a file. We can also use a method called readlines. Let me just change from read to readlines and see what we get. Note that while the read method returns a string, the readlines method returns a list where each element is a line from the open file. A line for Python is a string of characters that ends with \n. What is that \n? It's basically a special character or a special way to tell us Python to go to the next line. Let me show you what happens if we iterate over that list. Content is a list. All right, then we can iterate. I will say for line in content, print line. Let me clean that screen and run it. Note that we print each element, but there is that empty line in between them. If you want to get rid of that empty line, we need to find a way to delete that \n from each element. How to do that? We can reassign line to line.strip. And strip is a method, or it's a string method, where we can define or we can specify what we want to strip from a string. The first string is going to be Argentina \n. Then I will say line is no longer Argentina \n, but only Argentina. Why? Because I'm stripping the \n. Now if I save it and run it, look what we get. The first return here, the first print, that's because of the line 13. Then we post-process that, we delete all the \n, and we no longer have an empty line in between the elements. Note that I wrote the for loop outside the with statement, because I just want to read the content of that file, and I no longer need the file, then I can close it. The read and the readlines methods read the entire file content into the memory. In case you are dealing with a very large file, you can also read it line by line. Let me show you. First, I will comment those lines and then bring that sentence. As I said, I'm going to be using the with statement. We open the file, we're going to read, and we assign that file object to file. Now, we can iterate over that file. We say for line in file, then we print the line. I will save it, clean that screen, and run it. And again, we get an empty line between the elements. What we can do, we can also strip the line. We just now assign the line to that strip method, and then we strip the \n. I will save it, clean that screen, and run it. Now we got the same result as before, but compare. Before, I read all the content using the readlines method and assign the readlines to a variable, and then I iterate over that variable outside the block. But now what we are doing is everything at once. We open the file, and then we say for line in file, our first line is Argentina. Actually, it's not only Argentina, it's Argentina plus the \n. Then we reassign that line, so we strip the \n, and now line becomes Argentina. What we can do here, let's create a list, countries, and now we append line to that list. I will no longer print that line, I will print that list. Alright, if I clean that screen and run it, look what we get. We get Argentina, Bolivia, and again, we don't have the \n. If I delete that line, or if I comment that line, we will get the same result, but having the \n. And that's it. We just saw 3 different ways to read information from a file. The iteration method, the one I just showed you, is the most used when you need to parse specific information from a file. To write data to a file, it's quite simple. We again gonna use the open function, which expects 2 arguments, the file name and the mode. For the file name, I'm gonna choose a file called write2file.txt, and our mode should be write. Then we type W short for write. As I said, I'm gonna be using the with statement to open files. For that, we type with, then the open function, and then we assign that file object to a variable. I'll call again file. To write data to a file, you just need to call the write method. For that, to type file.write. Now, it's important that the data you pass to that file must be a string. Let's pass first line. If I now save that script and run that code, we will create that file. Which file? The write2file.txt. Let's see if we have it. There you are, we have it. We just create our first line. Let's now create our second line. For that, I copy that line and just type second. Okay, if I run it again, look what happens. Now we have first line, and then our second line is not really in the second line. I told you before that a line for Python is a string of characters that ends with \n. That means that we need to add that \n to tell Python to go to the next line. To do that, we can do string concatenation, \n, and run that code again. If you go to that file, we finally get our second line string in the second line. What if you want to add to a file numbers, integer or float? For that, let's create a numerical list. I will say numerical, and let's give 1, 2, 3, and some floats. That's okay. If I want to add each of those elements to a file, we can now iterate over that list for number in numerical. I just say file.write. Here you could say number, but don't forget, every time you write to a file, it must be a string. As I know that the first number is 1 and the data type is integer, I need to convert from integer to string. For that, use the str function. Now, let me just delete those lines. You're missing now only the \, which again means goes to the next line. If I save that code, run that script, we finally get 1, 2, 3, and all the floats. If I want now to append to that file, let's change the mode from write to append. For that, we just give the A, which is short for append. Let's create another list. I call it, let's say, string list, and assign to that Jesse, Walt, and Ollie. Now I want to append each of those names in string list. Now we have for names in string list, right here we just need names. I don't need to convert. Why? Because Jess, Walt, and Ollie, they are all strings already. Then if I save that code and run it, go to the file, we have 1, 2, 3 as you had before, and now Jesse, Walt, and Ollie were appended. It is often the case that we don't need the entire content of the file, but only part of it. To get a small piece of data from a text file, that's what we call parsing, or parsing a file. In that example, we're gonna have a text file called exercise.txt. It contains names, age, and heights. Note that there is a hash in between the data. Our task is to save all the names, ages, and heights in different lists so that we can perform additional operations on it. How to start? We first need to open that file. How to do that? We use the open function. What is the name of the file? Exercise.txt, and the mode you need to use is read. I'm gonna open that file using the with statement. With open, that's the function, that's gonna create a file object, and I'm gonna assign that to a variable called file. Now, let's iterate over that file and see what we get. For that, we type for line in file, print line. If I save that code and run it, we get all the lines of that file and also an empty line. And that empty line is because of that \n. We can get rid or strip that \n using the strip method. We then reassign line to line.strip. Then what we want to strip, the \n. If I save that code and run it, now we have all the lines and we just need to get rid of that hash. To get rid of that hash character, we're gonna be using another string method called split. Let me show you. We reassign line to line.split, and here as argument we need to supply where you want to split that string. We want to split everywhere we find a hash. Now if I save that code and run it, we get all the lines converted to string, and the first element is Amelia, so that's the name of the person. The second element is the age, and the third element is the height. Then we can easily access each data. How? We just need to access each element using Python indexing. And don't forget, Python index starts with 0. Let's then create our list. The first list called names, the second one ages, and the third one heights. And then we assign empty list for each of them. What we want now is to append. We say names.append and then line. If I let it like that, I'm gonna have the entire list appended to that list. I don't want that. I just want the first element, which is the name, append to the names list. The ages list, we just need the second element, and the height list, the third element. All right, then we just change the name and height. Perfect. Now we no longer need to print line, but outside of the block, because I no longer need the file, we can print each list. Let's say names. Then we can also print ages and heights. Ages and heights. Let's run that code and see what we get. I'll clean that screen and run it. When you read information from a file, it's always a string. Doesn't matter if it's a number, you know that it is a number. When Python reads that information, it's gonna be a data type string. You need to convert that. How? As I want age to be an integer, we just call the int function. Height is gonna be a float. Then we call the float function. And if I save that code, run that script, we finally get all the correct data types. Inside names list, we have all strings. Inside age list, each element is an integer. And inside the heights list, each element is a float. And that's it. That's a very basic example of how to parse a file in Python. That's how you can read and write data to a text file. We also had the introduction of how to parse information from a file. And for that, we just got to know two string methods, strip and split. To get more proficient in parsing, we need to know how to deal with strings, and that's the topic of the next video. Thanks for watching.